Thank you, Martha. I'm sure you've heard these words before if you've watched any television at all in the last 20 years. Help me, I've fallen, I can't get up. Have you heard those words? Have you seen that commercial? Some of the younger kids may not have seen that, but we all have seen that cheesy television commercial. It's been around for years, it runs in all different kinds of versions. It's overly melodramatic with the woman on the floor and she's fallen, she can't get up, and it's trying to sell you a little button you wear around your neck so that you can push it, so that regardless of whether you're alone or whatever, you can push that button, and somebody somewhere on the other end of a phone is going to say, "What's wrong?" And you can yell out, "I've fallen, I can't get up," and help will be on the way. You know, Nora Claver has written what she calls an anti-self-help book. And she says in her book, asking for help is a universally dreaded endeavor. Now, and the premise sort of goes whether we're struggling with getting that heavy bag in the overhead bin on the airplane, or whether we're fixing a flat tire by the side of the road, Americans are much more likely to say, if you stop to assist them, "No, I'm good, I can handle this myself," than they are to say, "Can you help me?" Unless it's one of those dire kinds of emergencies when we really need the police or the doctor or the firefighter, we'll ask for that kind of help. But other things, not so much. You know, if we fall and we can't get up, we generally, as Americans will say, would rather crawl to the street, get in the car, than inconvenience somebody ourselves. I know a pastor that went visiting, and he turned the wrong way on the sidewalk coming down the steps and broke both of his knees. He pulled himself to the car and somehow managed to drive himself to the hospital because he didn't want to bother anybody. If I fall coming off your steps, I will call somebody. No one was home that day when he went to visit to beat it all. But you know, there are folks that are like that. In her research, Claver suggests that there's a number of reasons why we as Americans don't ask for help, and we try instead to do it on our own. One of the first reasons, she says, is that we were never taught how to ask for help, and we have so few positive role models that can help us do that. You know, our grandparents were often part of a generation that valued what? Self-sufficiency. They valued the ability to do it on our own. You know, we can struggle, we can make this happen. And asking for help was something they did only if they were drowning in the river somewhere or drowning in the pond. And so there was an ethic of self-sufficiency that's been passed down to most of us. Another thing she noted in her study was that we love our independence. In a book entitled Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community, a man by the name of Robert Putnam reports that Americans are becoming more isolated from each other, even as attendance has decreased in clubs and community service organizations, including the church. And he says it's the advent of the internet that enables us to pretty much do most of the things on our own by tapping only a few keys. He says we don't need to go to a physical store for a lot of our shopping. I'm an Amazon kind of guy myself. Nor do we even need to be present in a classroom anymore to get education, which means that a lot of folks can get by with only occasional interactions with clerks or professors or even other people. A third thing that she suggests is that we don't think to ask. She says that we've been so brainwashed by the American ethic of self-sufficiency that a lot of times it just never comes to our mind. We get so focused on caring for ourselves that we don't realize that we're at the point that we need to be asking for help, because we think, oh, if I'll just keep working on this a little while longer and I'll solve it. But sometimes we don't. Another thing she noted, it's easier to do it ourselves. And as a pastor, you don't know how often that one jumps up in my mind. It's a whole lot easier sometimes for me to just do it than it is to ask somebody else to do it, because they may not have the same understanding that I have about what I want done, or they may not have the same enthusiasm or the same timetable. And so oftentimes, and this is something I fight, for me to ask you to do something and then step back and let you do it, I'm putting a lot of trust in you, because it means that I am not going to try to make it happen myself, because I cannot, as a single individual, whether a pastor or not, make everything happen by myself. And so when I ask you, I am giving up a lot of control that I have throughout most of my ministry felt like it would be simpler for me just to keep. So when I ask, I'm really asking, and I'm really expecting, and I'm really hoping that you will take that as an opportunity to grow in your faith and to grow in your leadership abilities and to grow. So when the preacher asks, this preacher is trying his best to make it a good ask, both for me and for you. And she also says that oftentimes we're just plain out afraid to ask, afraid what folks might say. Oh, why is he needing help? Why can't he do that on his own? In short, she's trying to suggest that we're very good at trying to do it ourselves. And oftentimes we can succeed, but the results may not be as big or as helpful as we thought they might be. By not getting the real help we need, we oftentimes miss out on the gifts that someone else has to offer us when we accept their help. Well, that all ties in today, I think, with this text. Bartimaeus didn't have the kind of qualms that we do about asking for help. And the results for him were nothing less than miraculous. His life was changed. He's the example of the kind of richness, the kind of blessing that can come to us if we're willing to set aside our self-sufficient outlook and to seek out real help and healing that can come from someone else, in this case from Jesus. He was sitting by the roadside, probably in the same place he had sat for days, months, weeks, probably years. He was doing what he always did, begging, please, coin please, help me please, I need your help. And he heard that there was a crowd coming. And he began to ask some other folks, what's the noise? What's the crowd all about? So I can hear it coming. I don't know what it is. Tell me. And someone obviously told him that Jesus was coming by. He didn't sit there and go, oh, wow, Jesus is on the way. What does it say that he does? He began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And what did the people around him say? Hush, be quiet. They wanted to hear Jesus. They wanted to see what was going on in the crowd. They didn't care that Bartimaeus needed Jesus right then. And so the crowd thought that he needed to be quiet, that he needed to continue to just be Bartimaeus and not be some person trying to cry out, thinking that Jesus was going to hear him. Well, when you look at Bartimaeus and you look at that situation, there are some things that will help us when we need to call for help. First of all, we need to learn to name our need. And we need to vow to remain open to the possible resolutions for that need. And when I say that, I mean Bartimaeus was a blind sort of beggar. His only hope for a productive life, the need that he needed to be addressed, was his vision. He needed to see. By his gaining of sight, his life would have been transformed. He knew specifically what his need was. But notice that he doesn't say, Jesus, heal me from my blindness. Heal me from my blindness. I'm a blind man. I'm a blind beggar. Jesus, come heal me. He didn't start out with those kind of words, did he? Instead, he shouted, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, a sinner, some texts put. Not have mercy on me, a blind man. You see, Bartimaeus, I think, seemed to understand that his vision was not only clouded, but that he also needed a spiritual healing as well. His physical eyes were blind, but spiritually he understood that he was not where he should be either. And so he opens himself to the possibility that this healing might be physical or spiritual, with an outside chance that it was going to be both. He was asking for spiritual help, and he was hoping that Jesus would not only help him spiritually, but to cure him physically. Secondly, I think we can learn that in asking for help, it begins when we acknowledge that we have a problem. The presenting problem, the one that's the most obvious, but also underlying ones. Now, while we may appear fine on the surface, most of us are really good with that smile. Most of us are really good at putting forth the face that says, oh, everything's going good. On the outside, you'd think that we're the happiest bunch of people in the world. But on the inside, a lot of us understand that there's a whole lot more grimacing, that there's a whole lot more pain that sort of lurks underneath. And so the more we try to hide it, the more insidious that often becomes in our lives. And we suddenly realize that there are certain things over which we are just simply powerless. And sin tends to be one of those things. To get help, whether it's physical or spiritual, we have to first be able to name that thing for which we're looking for help. You know, save me, spiritual help. Heal me, a physical thing. Bartimaeus seems to know that regardless of what's going on with his eyes, he's got even bigger problems in his life. He understands that he needs God's presence in a very special way. He prays what many have called the original sinner's prayer. He knows that Jesus can do something about the things that are binding him rather than the things that blind him. And so he's eager. He's eager for whatever help that Jesus can give. And we too, when we open ourselves to the possibilities that Jesus can heal us, that Jesus can heal others, that Jesus can send people our way, that Jesus can guide us and love us and care for us, that Jesus can do all the things that he can do, when we open ourselves to those possibilities, rather than just simply focusing on the exact way we want it done, then I think we're going to open ourselves to more of an opportunity for God to move and to touch us. Thirdly, this text suggests, I think, that we have to have a leap of faith and actually ask. You know, we have to believe that we qualify for help before we can actually ask for help. Bartimaeus believed that he was worthy of help, not because he was a great person, but because he was one of God's children. He was a Jew who'd been looking for the arrival of the Son of David, a Jew that had been waiting for the day when Messiah would come. And so when he hears Jesus, he cries out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus heard that cry. And Jesus responded, saying, call him here. You see, Bartimaeus then responded by throwing off his cloak and leaping up in his blindness. And you can almost see him struggling through the crowd, grabbing at people and pushing and shoving, not knowing exactly where he's going. But eventually he makes his way to Jesus. He makes his way to the man that he had been waiting for all his life, recognizing that this man was Messiah, that this man was the Son of David, that this is the one that the prophets had foretold, that in this man something can happen, that something was happening, and right now it was about to happen to him. You see, when he gets there, Jesus, in fact, in Mark's Gospel, verse 11, when he teaches us about prayer, says, whatever you ask in prayer, believe and that you've received it and it will be yours. In James it says, we have not because we have not asked. And Jesus was all about this idea, this understanding that if we would ask, he would answer. And so when this blind man, calling from the side of the road, finally makes his way to Jesus, he asks him these words, what do you want me to do for you? And blind Bartimaeus is ready with a reply. He doesn't think, well, teacher, I need to think about that a while. I need to understand who you are. I need to understand how many times, what's your percentage of healing when folks have asked for healing. I need to I need to see how well you know the law. He didn't worry about those things. When Jesus asked the question, what did blind Bartimaeus say? Teacher, let me see. You know, Jesus tends to ask that question, what do you want me to do for you? A lot more often than most of us give credit. Can you imagine Jesus asking that question to you this morning? Can you imagine him so concerned about your life and about what's happening to you, whether it be good or bad or somewhere in the middle? Can you imagine that if you were to go to him saying, teacher, and he says, what do you want me to do for you? Can you imagine how you would respond? Save me from this. Deliver me from that. Heal me from this. Do this thing that will make me whole, God. Bring me into your power. Bring me into your presence. What are the deepest needs within you that you haven't ever asked Jesus or anyone else to help you with? Those are the kinds of needs that you need to be thinking about. Those are the kinds of things that you need to be willing to bring before him, because he is asking that question day in and day out. What do you need me to do for you? What do you need me to do to help make you whole? What do you need me to do to give you the life that I can give you through my name? He's asking. He said to Bartimaeus, go. Your faith has made you whole. Well, faith can make us well too. We may not receive precisely what it is we want, but we can be assured that Jesus is ready to supply our needs. And here's one of the keys to this whole situation, I think. Faith is the catalyst for asking. We've got to have faith before we can ask, I think. And asking becomes the key then to healing. We've got to have faith before we ask, and then we have to be willing to ask in order to be healed. I think those two things are fairly clear in this story. But we also then have to be grateful. That's another key. Once we ask, once we receive our help, we've got to show gratitude. And when we have that, as we like to say in our day, that attitude of gratitude, it's out of our self-sufficiency. It allows us to celebrate what others have done for us. And in a way, giving thanks then is the substance, I think, that can unfreeze the wheels that drive a community of believers, that will enable us as children of God to acknowledge our dependence on God and on one another, learning to be grateful for what God has done, learning to be grateful for the gifts that God has given to us and that we use in the community called the body of Christ to help one another. You see, when Bartimaeus received his sight, what was his first action? His action was to follow Jesus up the road toward Jerusalem. Now, we know that Jesus is on his way to confront the evil powers of sin on the cross, but Bartimaeus is simply happy now to go along, grateful to Jesus for all that he's done. And his gratitude is not merely in words. His gratitude is shown by his willingness to become a follower of this man that he had just met on the side of the road. He can't reciprocate what Jesus has done for him, but he can give his life in response. It's the same for us. If you think about it, we are called to give our entire lives to God. There's absolutely no way that we can physically or monetarily or any way repay God or thank God for what he has done through his Son, Jesus Christ. But yet we can do one thing. We can believe in him and we can follow. My friends, that's what this passage is getting at. We have to understand that we live in a world that has fallen down and can't get up on its own. We have to understand that we've fallen too, and that there are times that we need help in order to stand again. And we have to understand that there's a solution. We've got to learn to not be afraid to ask. We've got to have faith and to be grateful to the God that supplies our needs. And likewise, we've got to learn to be thankful for the people that are already around us, ready to help us on God's behalf. I think that's what this passage from Bartimaeus is trying to explain to us today. His story can in many ways become our story. And I hope that you will be willing to respond, because Jesus is asking each of us, what do you want me to do for you? And he is willing to respond. And so as we finish out our service today, I remind you that this altar is open for a prayer. I remind you that Jesus is calling to each of us individually and saying, what do you want me to do for you? Perhaps now's the time to come to this altar and answer that question by saying, Lord, I need. The altar is open.